This is the history of the Bible and how it was really written. I'm Rutger Steele, and thank you for watching another video from Gone Gospel. Has the most influential book in human history been hopelessly corrupted over thousands of years? Is the Bible we read today just a collection of stories changed and distorted through an ancient game of telephone? Is the Bible truly a translation of a translation of a translation? These are pretty common assumptions. We picture this fragile chain of translations, one copying another, with each new version straying further from the original. We imagine the book in our hands is just a pale, distorted echo of what was first written. But what if that entire assumption is wrong? What if the real story of the Bible isn't about corruption, but about a level of meticulous, almost unbelievable preservation? Today, we're digging into the incredible true story of how the Bible was really written. It's a journey from spoken words passed down around campfires to miraculously preserved texts that have survived millennia against all odds. Before a single word of the Bible was ever written down, it was spoken, it was sung, it was memorized. In a world where most people were illiterate, oral tradition wasn't just common, it was the bedrock of culture and history. The earliest stories of creation, the laws given to Moses, the songs of David and the prophecies of Isaiah, these weren't first read in a book, they were learned by ear. Imagine ancient Israelite families gathered together listening as elders recited the accounts of their ancestors. These weren't just bedtime stories, this was the living memory of a people, their identity, their covenant, their very relationship with God. This process of telling and retelling was a sacred duty, preserving their history and faith from one generation to the next. The stories that would one day form the Old Testament were shared by word of mouth for years, sometimes for centuries, before they were ever written down. This oral culture valued memory and accurate retelling in ways we can barely comprehend today. It was personal, communal, and deeply ingrained in their society, setting the stage for the immense care that would be taken when these words were finally put to parchment. So, how did these spoken stories become a book? The transition from spoken word to written text happened gradually, as a tiny minority of literate scribes began the monumental task of writing it all down. These weren't just secretaries. Many were priests or part of professional guilds who saw their work as a sacred calling. Between roughly 1500 and 400 BC, these foundational texts were written and compiled. Over centuries, they were organized into the three main sections of the Hebrew Bible, also known as the Tanakh, the Torah, the Law, the Nevi'im, the Prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings. The scribes who copied these texts followed astonishingly strict rules. Their goal wasn't creativity, it was perfect replication. Jewish tradition outlines the immense care they took. They could only write on clean animal skins, using a special recipe for black ink. Before writing the sacred name of God, they would have to wipe their pen and wash their entire bodies. The number of letters and words on a page was counted, and if a single mistake was found, the entire section was often destroyed and they would start all over again. This wasn't just copying, it was a form of worship. It was this deep reverence for the text that led to its careful transmission, ensuring that the books remained remarkably consistent, even as they were copied by hand over hundreds of years. For centuries, skeptics argued that even with all that care, 1,000 years of hand copying must have led to major errors. After all, the oldest complete manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible dated to around the 10th century AD. How could we possibly know what the text looked like 1,000 years before that, around the time of Jesus? The answer came in 1947 with a discovery that shocked the world. A Bedouin shepherd boy searching for a lost goat near the Dead Sea tossed a rock into a cave and heard pottery shatter. Inside, he and his friends found clay jars holding ancient scrolls, wrapped in linen and hidden for nearly 2,000 years. These were the Dead Sea Scrolls. This treasure trove contained pieces of every single book of the Old Testament, except for Esther, and when they were dated, it was confirmed. These manuscripts were over 1,000 years older than any copy previously known, dating from the 3rd century BC to the 1st century AD. This was the ultimate test. Scholars now had manuscripts from before and during the time of Christ to compare with the medieval texts from a millennium later. What they found was stunning. After 1,000 years of being copied by hand, the texts were found to be virtually identical. A detailed study of the Isaiah scroll, for example, found that over 95% of the text was word-for-word identical with the later standard text. The remaining 5% consisted of minor spelling variations and slips of the pen that didn't affect the meaning of the text at all. The Dead Sea Scrolls provided undeniable proof. The Old Testament had been passed down with stunning accuracy. This wasn't a game of telephone. It was a testament to the incredible fidelity of the scribes. Even before this discovery, we had another crucial text called the Septuagint. Around the 3rd century BC, as Greek became the common language, Jewish scholars in Alexandria, Egypt, translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. This version made the Old Testament accessible to the wider world and was the one most often quoted by Jesus and the New Testament writers. Following the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, the story of the Bible entered a new chapter. The New Testament documents were written between approximately 45 and 100 AD. These weren't mythical tales written centuries after the fact. They were composed by the apostles or their close associates, people who were either eyewitnesses themselves or had interviewed eyewitnesses to the events. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John gave 4 accounts of Jesus' life. The Book of Acts tracked the explosive growth of the early church, and the epistles, which are really just letters from apostles like Paul, Peter, and John, were sent to young churches all over the Roman Empire to offer guidance and encouragement. These documents were written in Koine Greek, the everyday language of the time, and they spread like wildfire among the early Christian communities. For the first few centuries, there was no single book called the New Testament. Instead, churches had treasured collections of these apostolic writings that they read during their worship services. As time went on, however, false teachings and fraudulent counterfeit texts began popping up. This created an urgent need for the church to formally recognize which writings were the real deal, the ones that truly carried divine authority. This process is known as canonization, from a Greek word meaning a measuring rod or a standard. Now, this wasn't some shadowy council meeting in a dark room, arbitrarily picking and choosing books. It was a centuries-long process of discernment by churches all over the world. Early church leaders compiled lists of writings that had been widely accepted as scripture from the very beginning. The main criteria were, was it written by an apostle or a close associate? Did it align with the established faith? Was it being used by churches everywhere? By 367 AD, Athanasius, the Bishop of Alexandria, wrote a letter that listed the same 27 books of the New Testament that we have today. He wasn't inventing something new. He was simply confirming what the Church had broadly recognized for generations. This was later formally confirmed at church councils, effectively closing the New Testament canon. Just as the Old Testament had its devoted scribes, the New Testament found its guardians in Christian monks and scholars. For over 1,000 years before the printing press, every single copy of the Bible had to be made by hand. Between the 6th and 10th centuries AD, a group of Jewish scribes called the Masoretes took on the job of preserving the Hebrew Bible. They were so dedicated to accuracy that they developed a system of vowel and accent markings to ensure the text would be pronounced correctly. They also created detailed notes in the margins, counting the verses, words, and even the letters of each book to prevent any errors from creeping in. Their work resulted in the Masoretic text, which is the standard Hebrew Bible used to this very day. Meanwhile, in monasteries across Europe and the Middle East, Christian monks painstakingly copied the Greek New Testament. This work preserved thousands upon thousands of manuscripts. Because we have so many copies from different places, scholars can cross-reference them to spot the rare copyist error and reconstruct the original text with overwhelming confidence. In fact, scholars estimate the New Testament has been transmitted with 99.5% accuracy. That tiny fraction of a percent in question consists of minor variants, like a different spelling of a name or a reversed word order, none of which affect any core Christian doctrine. To put that in perspective, other ancient works like Homer's Iliad have a textual purity of about 95%. The Bible's accuracy is simply in a league of its own. That commitment to accuracy carried right on into the era of translation. Now let's tackle a huge misconception, that the English Bible is a translation of a translation of a translation. That's just not true. One of the most important early translations was the Latin Vulgate, finished by the scholar Jerome around 405 AD. Jerome didn't just update an older version, he went back to the original Hebrew and Greek manuscripts to create a Latin version for the Western Roman Empire. The Vulgate became the standard Bible in Western Europe for 1,000 years. The first complete English Bibles didn't show up until the 14th and 15th centuries, most famously by John Wycliffe and later William Tyndale. Tyndale paid the ultimate price for his work. He was executed for the crime of translating the Bible into everyday English. But his work paved the way for the King James Version of 1611, a landmark of literature that shaped the modern world. But here's the most important part for us today. Modern translators don't just update the King James Version. They work directly from the oldest and best available manuscripts in the original languages Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Thanks to discoveries like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the thousands of New Testament manuscripts, today's translators have access to a text that is closer to the originals than at any other time in history. The evidence isn't just in the manuscripts, some of it is literally set in stone. While archaeology can't prove faith, it has repeatedly confirmed the existence of people, places, and customs described in the Bible. Discoveries like the Tel Dan Stele, an inscribed stone from the 9th century BC, mention the House of David, the first non-biblical evidence for King David. The Moabite stone, from the same period, describes a conflict between Moab and Israel, and even names the Israelite king Omri, just like the Book of Kings does. For the New Testament, an inscription with the name of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who sentenced Jesus, was found in 1961. In 1990, a bone box was found inscribed with the name Joseph, son of Caiaphas, believed to be the high priest from Jesus' trial. Excavations at Jericho have revealed collapsed walls from the right time period for the biblical account of its conquest. Again and again, the spade of the archaeologist has unearthed evidence that lines up with the historical framework of the Bible. Has the Bible been hopelessly changed and corrupted over the centuries? The evidence reveals a very different story. It's a story that starts with sacred oral traditions, passed down with incredible care. It continues with meticulous scribes who treated their work as worship, counting every letter. It includes the shocking discovery of ancient scrolls in a desert cave that proved 1,000 years of accuracy. And it rests on thousands of manuscripts that allow us to reconstruct the original text with unparalleled certainty. That game of telephone idea completely falls apart when you realize the first person in the chain wrote everything down. And the message wasn't whispered, but copied under the strictest quality control you can imagine. The story of the Bible isn't about how much it was altered. It's about how miraculously it has been preserved. If you found this historical dive into the Bible's history fascinating, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. We really want to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. What part of this story surprised you the most? And as always, we sincerely hope this video about the history of the Bible and how it was really written resonated with you, and if it did, please watch it again and again. Share it with family and friends, share it with those who suffer, share it with those who seek eternal life. A like, a share, or subscribe from you pushes Gone Gospel out to those in need. Please share your thoughts below, as we would absolutely love to hear from you. Subscribe, especially if you're a believer or a seeker. Gone Gospel is here for you. We'll let you know when we have another piece of the divine puzzle to share.